Let's jump into the issues, and we've identified really two issues. I mean, obviously, as Craig brought up, there's so many to be dealt with when it comes to religious liberty. But the two things that are organizational and are affecting organizations is the redefinition of marriage on a national and a local level in terms of law, and also the HHS mandate. So we're going to jump in immediately to the HHS mandate. This was something that Chuck Colson said early was one of the greatest threats to religious liberty in his lifetime, which is saying a lot because, again, as I said, Chuck Colson was always right. But talk about that, Jennifer. You and I have had great conversations about this on radio, but it amazes me that there are some folks who just aren't clear on what is the HHS mandate. That's a Catholic issue, so on and so on. There's a lot of myths surrounding it. The Health and Human Services mandate, describe what that is and its threat to religious liberty.
This is actually the perfect example of what I was saying before about religious liberty being the fulcrum, the linchpin of all our other freedoms. We need to understand that if religious liberty falls, we should expect a number of other freedoms to fall with it. The Obamacare situation is a case in point. The HHS mandate is the leading edge of implementation of what Obamacare will look like. Many other parts don't come into play until 2014. So this is the preview. This is our understanding of what's going to be at the heart of it. And really, Obamacare, the most important thing to understand about it is that it hands over to the government, and particularly to nameless, faceless bureaucrats, the power to define health care benefits and to mandate what all individuals must buy, what all employers must cover, and what all insurance companies must provide. So that is, you can't get out of that vicious triangle. That is covering all their bases, defining benefits and mandating that coverage. The HHS mandate is the first piece, but it will not be the last, of what government requires be covered. The mandate requires that nearly all employers provide for their employees coverage of abortion-inducing drugs, contraception, and sterilization, regardless of religious objection. There are just a few exceptions to that. They only boil down to formal houses of worship and the ministries they have. If you are a religious nonprofit, if you are a nonprofit that has moral concerns, or if you are a business, family-owned business that tries to run its business according to its religious beliefs, you do not get that exemption. So this is the narrowest exemption we've seen in federal law, and a huge erosion of the principle that we should be able to live out our lives in the public square according to our religious beliefs.
And Jennifer, just to clarify too, I mean, you made a very important point, which was this is the first implementation of Obamacare. But what this first implementation does is define a religious group in such a narrow way that this becomes now precedent for how all of these other mandates are going to be enforced. Is that correct?
Well, and they'll have the authority to define anything anyway. You know, in each of these categories, we would not expect the definition of religious groups to get greater in anything down the road. If anything, it would become the bar would be lowered.
Okay, and we've heard several times the announcement of a so-called compromise, this compromise or that compromise. My favorite was this last one where they said, listen, we're going to simplify the religious exemption by connecting it with a tax code. I've never heard simple and tax code together in the same sentence, but that was the argument, right? So, but talk a little bit about that. These so-called accommodations,
Yeah.
What did we get?
This has been a ridiculous 18-month process since the first announcement of this policy, when there was a huge firestorm of protest, very broad, very ecumenical, and the administration has been all about solving their political problem, but not solving the actual religious liberty problem. And so this latest round, just last month, was another exhibition of that. It was basically avoiding solving the religious liberty problem once again, and taking such contortions and lengths to do that now they're trampling on other freedoms, market freedoms. They're dictating to insurance companies what they must do to get around solving the religious liberty problem. This is what happens when you don't respect a first freedom. You end up trampling many others.
Okay, and just to be clear too, the mandate requires coverage not only of contraception, which of course is a distinction in belief between many evangelicals and Catholics, but then also sterilization services and certain medicines that are known to be abortion-inducing.
Yeah, exactly right. And remember, I thought Eric spoke very well about this in the intro, that these are incidental. The particular policies in question are incidental, even though there are policies that should offend evangelicals in addition to Catholics and many other religious believers in this particular one. But it is the principle that the government would be able to disregard the freedoms of institutions in this way You name it, could be the incidental policy issue down the road. We are breaking down an important wall of protection of freedom here.
Now, Matt, you did a great job kind of giving us the scope of the litigation that's happening. It does seem, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but it does seem so often, and this goes back to some of the worldview concerns that the Colson Center often speaks to, that so many of these challenges to religious liberty are pitting religious liberty against sexual freedoms. As you guys litigate these different cases, and I want to get into some of those here in just a second, but is this the collision that we're kind of on between sexual identity, sexual freedom, and religious liberty, as if these two are incompatible?
It is, and it's sexual freedom in the secularist sense that the government has decided to impose on the culture, disregarding religious liberty. So in the marriage arena, the attempt to change the definition of marriage is premised on the idea that if you disagree with the new definition of marriage, you're a bigot, and you have animus against gays and against marriage. And that premise causes the intolerability of anybody acting on their belief that marriage is between a man and a woman. And so in the HHS Mandate situation, what you have is the premise that pregnancy and fertility are diseases rather than health. And therefore, no one can act against that. No one can act according to their biblical view that pregnancy and fertility are blessings. And so no one can have health insurance, whether you're an individual buying it, whether you're an employer providing it, whether you're an insurance company offering it. No one can have health insurance that acts as if pregnancy and or fertility and or unborn children really are blessings. You have to act according to what the government says these things are. And it's because the government has redefined and imposed its own definition of what counts as religion and narrowed it. So in this latest so-called compromise, what the government has done is it's chosen one of the most narrow definitions in federal law that is not even used for the purpose of conscience. It's used for a much narrower purpose that really only covers houses of worship. And it said, here's a section of the code that only covers houses of worship. We're going to say that this is the limit of religious freedom in America. And so we represent companies and institutions that are across the spectrum in terms of Christian belief. We represent Tyndale House Publishers, for which we've obtained 3 of the 12 injunctions that have been issued against this particular mandate.